Welcome to Messy Christian Mamas. We are three Christian moms with a progressive mindset and loving hearts and minds. We are imperfect humans, but we're all loved in God's sight. At some point, we've all felt like the church and Christianity may not have been for us, but God isn't looking for perfection. He's just looking for you.
We are not experts in Christian theology, and we do not represent any particular Christian faith or church. We are simply here to be authentic, and we hope you join us on this journey. Today's episode is about grace. Grace we give to others, and the grace we receive from God.
Hi. Welcome, everybody. We're talking about grace today. Have a mint in my mouth, so I'm going to take that out for a second so you can understand me. So, let's see, where do we even start with grace? I guess my own personal experience I'll talk a little bit about. I am not a person who has always exhibited grace toward others or felt it exhibited to myself. You know, I think I was raised as a Christian, but I definitely went through a period of time where I genuinely felt forsaken. And during that time, I did not feel God's grace. And I probably did not exhibit a ton of it myself. I think I tend to be a pretty warm and loving and caring person, but, you know, I am not always demonstrating those qualities. I would say on my best days for sure, but I finally found that holding grudges against all the people that I perceived to have done me wrong or wronged me in some way was just exhausting, and it was really impacting the way that I felt about myself and just my general well-being. So I have this funny concept that I wanted to talk to you both about, the CISO principle.
The what?
The CISO principle.
Okay.
So the CISO principle is the in, shit out principle.
You're allowed to bleep out here.
Ash is like,
Okay. So it tells us that to adjust our outputs, we have to adjust our inputs. And so that was a big part of trying to get more into a state of grace myself, where I was giving it, was how can I better receive it? And so some things too, what grace is not to me, to be really clear, is forgiveness without boundaries.
Yeah.
Right? God gave us brains. God gave us a nervous system. God gave us an emotional intelligence for a reason. We can learn not to touch the burner without holding a grudge against the stove.
Right. I love that analogy.
So grace, I think, is a pathway to mental and emotional self-preservation.
Yeah.
And it was for me. At times I definitely still struggle with holding grudges. Kaylee and I were just having a conversation about this the other day. And I definitely don't hate anyone. Grudges, for the most part, I don't hold against people. And the limited grudges that I do hold, I'm definitely working through. But they, I would say, are reserved for heinous things done to me when I was a child.
Right.
To be really clear. And
I think that also gives you a filter, though,
it does.
for your grace and for your grudges, because it's one of these things where it's like, I went through this horrific
hell
event, and if I can find it in my heart to find forgiveness and grace for that person, then like this is nothing. You have no idea. Like, you think you've hurt me, but you have no idea what I've been through.
Yeah, I think that's what.
When did you get to that point that you were ready to forgive people who had wronged you so horribly?
That's a really good question. I think that I really started going to that place in 2019. 2019 was a big shakeup for me in my life, and
Pandemic,
I lost a job right before the pandemic. I lost my job, and my whole world felt like it was falling apart around me, and I just had to kind of reconstruct myself mentally in the wake of all of that happening. And I didn't finish that work then. It's been ongoing since then, but definitely a journey that I have been on. And what's so funny is as I embarked on that journey, Christianity was a part of it, was a part of that journey for me. So my husband brought us back to the church earlier in 2019. When that happened, I started really getting more serious about my Christianity.
Yeah.
And I found grace for myself, and I found a pathway to give grace to others too.
Yeah, I feel like growing up in the Lutheran church, Lutherans are really big on forgiveness, and with forgiveness, that also, I mean, like the guilt. It's like Catholic light with guilt.
Sure.
So as someone who grew up with a Catholic father,
Right. Right.
very familiar with this concept.
I feel like growing up in the Lutheran church, I did have like a really good foundation for forgiveness, and I think when I was in high school was when I first had some relationships that just really hurt really deeply, and it was like my first chance to be like, okay, am I going to forgive this person and be happy in my soul with this, or am I going to like just keep this bitterness within me? And I felt that way for most of my life, and then like the divorce kind of it's been difficult to, when you feel like people really, when you feel really hurt, it's just hard. It's hard to know that boundary too of like, am I going to forgive but not forget and like learn a lesson from whatever happened.
Absolutely.
Well, I think in that, I sent you guys that sermon that Andy Stanley did, which changed my life on grace. And he very clearly states in the sermon that, Jesus was 100% grace and 100% truth at the same time. So it's like he wants you to follow him, but he doesn't excuse what you've done. So I think it's very much set up a pathway for us as Christians, how we go forward in giving grace to other people, where we give 100% of our grace, but we also give it with 100% truth. Look, I will forgive you for this. However, you've now created a boundary because what you did wasn't okay. Yeah. So I think this is not grace. I don't think grace is necessarily forgiveness. Like you said, I don't think it's forgiveness without boundaries. I think it's, you need to be honest with the person, including yourself, that you're giving grace to, because Jesus didn't turn around and say, oh, I forgive you, keep doing what you're doing. He said, I forgive you, now you follow me, and I'll lead you on a better path.
And show you the way.
Yeah, so I'll show you the way. So I just think it's one of these things where grace is it's really easy for me to show other people, but it was very hard for me to accept myself. Yeah, to receive it. It was really, really tough. And I remember listening to that sermon and being like, yeah, you're 1000% right. Like, I 100% don't deserve it. And that's what makes grace so amazing, is that it is a gift that you could not ever earn. And if you feel like you've earned it, then it's not really grace.
Absolutely.
So how would you guys define grace, God's grace towards you?
It's just like undeserved favor. It's just love, and it's unconditional.
Unconditional love, I think for me is really how I would say it.
Yeah.
And I think it's like this no concept, like nothing you can do is ever bad enough to where he's not going to offer you grace, as long as you're coming to him with a solemnity and and sorrow, and saying and asking for genuine forgiveness, not trying to find the next time you can do it.
Right.
So I think that when people are like, well, how can you be a Christian? And not just to me, but to other people I know, how can you be a Christian? How can you say that God loves you? And I'm like, because he does. If you look in the Bible, like, Jesus is friends with all of these people that nobody,
specifically,
tax collectors,
intentionally.
and he was honest about it, and he never turned around and excused their behavior. But he tells the Pharisees, the sick, the healthy don't need a doctor, the sick do. I'm here to save them. I'm here for them. And so that was always such a crazy concept to me, that someone would, it was ludicrous, because growing up in the household that I did, like, we received grace daily. And, you know, our parents were amazing parents and had very unconditional love for us. So I don't know where the switch happened necessarily, where I just thought I was undeserving of that type of forgiveness. Because my parent, like, you know, when I went through everything that I went through and I came home and I told my parents I was pregnant, there was no, I was 29, so that probably helped, but there was no scene. There was no big hoopla. There was no big argument. It was, okay, what do we do next?
Yeah.
And like, how can we, how can we help you? What do you want to do? How can we help you do this? What do you need from us? And I feel like God does very much the same thing. When you come to him with your tail tucked between your legs and you're so scared of what his reaction is going to be, and he is that loving parent that's like, okay, you know what you did was wrong, but how can I help you move forward? Like, how can we get through this together?
Yeah, this has come to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think about like free will too. It's like why we're human and we're not divine, because we have this free will and we have these choices. And so just understanding of that, you might make a wrong choice, but God's still going to love you either way.
Ashley, you talked too about learning lessons through this, and I feel like in those times when I feel stuck, if I'm holding a grudge against someone, I feel stuck and unable to give grace to someone else.
And it's just hurting you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to see through those moments, but once you finally can like clear the air a little bit and try to love yourself a little bit through that, then I ask myself, what does God want me to learn here? You know, what is the lesson here? Why am I resisting this grace? There's something that I can change in myself to get onto that path more clearly.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough to get on that. It's tough to get on that path, especially when you're in a really dark place. So after I had Charlotte, you know, I named her Charlotte Grace, and I named her Charlotte Grace because Charlotte's Web was my favorite book growing up, and I thought Charlotte's Web, and I thought Charlotte Grace sounded like a really great Southern name, and so I was like, that sounds great. Yeah, it's a great Southern name. So I just remember, you know, and I knew I was gonna probably be a single mom, and then at the hospital it became I'm gonna definitely be a single mom. And I had really bad postpartum depression and anxiety, and I was just full of anger and hatred and rage, and just, you know, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was not parenting, and I was holding on to this anger so tightly, and it started to lose its grip a little bit as I went through therapy. And then I just remember learning about grace and thinking, why am I holding on so tightly to, like, wearing it like a badge of honor, this anger and resentment and rage, when I could be spending that, because it takes we talked about this, takes so much energy to hate someone. To carry a grudge and to be angry, you have to that's a choice that you're making.
So much mental real estate.
So much.
It's undeserved.
Yeah, and it's not affecting the other person at all.
Right.
At all. Charlotte's biological father chose not to be in the picture, and thank God has kept his promise, has not popped in and out, and I've seen what that can do to children, and I am very, very grateful to the fact that, you know, he made the decision and he stuck with it, because I haven't had to deal with my child being let down and disappointed in that way. But it was one of these things where it's like, we never had contact after that. So I'm angry and rageful and upset and holding on to this anger, and this man is living his life. Like, he has no idea that I feel this way. So it was one of these things where I was sitting there and I was like, okay, well, I need to let this go so that I can spend this energy being a parent, because I am her parent and I need to be present and I need to be spending this time with her. So that was one thing of letting it go. And then it was the part of accepting it for myself and realizing that I was worthy of that. And that was what, it was painful. And that is what led me to realize the reason why I had called her Grace is because she was my saving grace.
Oh my gosh.
I
that's
said,
beautiful. That's so
I was
beautiful.
on this path of destruction. I was going to either end up dead or in jail. And I feel like God was up there going, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? She's on a path to nowhere. And I've got plans for her and I need her to get back on track. You know what? She was told she never could get pregnant. We're going to get her pregnant. I was on birth control.
He's playing a chess game.
Yeah, we're going to, because I think he knew that was the only thing that was going to get me to stop in my tracks and make a turn for something different. So yeah, so that means that's why I call her Charlotte Grace. Because she really was the thing that saved me, and she was the reason why I stopped doing so many destructive things, and she is a daily lesson in giving grace. Daily. So it's one of these things where I've gotten really good at giving grace, because every single day it seems like I'm having to go, okay, well, let's try not to do that one again. So
I think it's really interesting when we look at God's grace too in the Bible. I think, to me, it's fascinating when we look at the case of Paul. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the most obvious cases for God's grace in the Bible. And he was a terrible man. He was nasty. He was pious. He was a murderer. He used his religion to justify murdering people. It was terrible. God blinded him for 3 days. We all know this story, but for anyone listening that doesn't, God blinded him for 3 days. On the third day, he regained his sight and had this spiritual awakening. Paul goes on to spread the gospel in the church, so far converting Jewish people and Gentiles the world over, basically, and even wrote half of the New Testament. God chose Paul. He chose him so specifically because of that story, right? As Paul is out there preaching and talking about his story. If it had just been someone who was raised to believe all of these things and hadn't had this terrible background, what a different story that is to tell, to convert people into being Christians and following Jesus. I think just like Jesus chose little James, if anyone's watching The Chosen, he's referred to as little James, whatever he's referred to in the Bible. I think it's like James the Little or James the Younger.
James the Younger.
Yeah, James the Younger. So also chose little James as an apostle to heal others during the mission of the 12. And that was such a specific choice as well, right? Because little James had a physical malady and he was not healed himself, and Jesus knew, if I send you out to go heal people and they see how much faith you have in me, that you yourself are not healed and can heal others, what a powerful story that is that can last for generations.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's really interesting the way that God chooses to use grace. I just think those two examples tell you so much about God and his grace. So we can't mistake his loving kindness and grace for weakness. He, like I said a second ago, he's playing a chess game. You know, he knows exactly with intention who he's going to choose to have the most effective impact. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
He's casting a net. He's not casting a line to catch a fish. You know, and how can he do that?
It makes me think of Amazing Grace, too, of the words in that hymn. It's always so powerful, and so many people connect to it. I think we're all human. We all have like the human experience, and then still being loved for that.
And to know even the people that did terrible things to me as a child, God loves them and gives them grace just as much as he gives to me, the child that was done to.
Right.
And I don't know how I feel about that, if I'm honest. But
it's so hard.
You know,
it's so hard.
It's so hard, but that is what he tells us. So who am I to not give grace to someone else when I have received so much, when I know he gives so much to everyone? It's our duty.
Yeah, it's like when people want to throw around, you know, they cherry pick their verses of the Bible and they want to throw around and for reasons to condemn everything. And I'm like, wait, hold on a second there. sir or ma'am.
You're doing it wrong.
If all sins are equal in the eyes of God, if what you're talking about is a sin, which I don't necessarily always believe is, depending on what we're talking about, but if all sin is equal in the eyes of God, and God loves that person just as much as he loves your righteous behind, then who are you to cast stones? I mean, that is my favorite Bible story, is the woman in the stones.
Yeah.
Because I connect with it so personally. When I read that story as an adult, especially as a woman having gone through what I went through, I read it and I was like, this woman was terrified. They had kept her all night, caught her doing something that she shouldn't have been doing. Man wasn't brought up, but whatever. We're going to leave that one alone. Whatever. And the fact that he has such a casual interaction with her when it's such a serious event, like, I take my shame and I think it's so big and so heavy and nobody can handle this shame. And Jesus is like, oh, okay, that's what the law says? Okay, I mean, sure. And this girl is probably quaking in her, like, little sandals, like, oh my God. Okay, but whoever hasn't sinned can throw the first stone. And then, like, kneels down and starts drawing in the dirt, which is my favorite image ever, because I'm just imagining him, like, doing little stick figures and, like, you know, little sun in the corner and everything like that. And they all disperse because they know none of them is without sin. None of them have led this pure life. But then he also then turns around to the woman and says, "Has no one condemned you?" And she goes, "No." And he goes, "Okay, then neither shall I. But go and sin no more."
Right.
So that is the part that, as an adult, hit me so hard, because it was, okay, I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to shame you for this, like everyone else did in the society. I'm not going to shame you, but nor am I going to condone what you're doing.
Right.
So
it's like a good teacher.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good parenting moment. It's one of these things where it's like, I understand you did what you did. We can't go back. Like, you have that sticker on your laptop. I've been watching it, reading it the whole time.
Aren't you the best sticker?
Yeah, they are. Don't trip over something that is behind you. So it's one of these where he's saying to the woman, look, this is done. It's over. Let's move on. Don't do it again.
Yeah.
And for me, it's something that I've tripped up on a lot, you know, since I've been getting healed and everything. So I have to constantly, every time I do trip and I make the same mistake, I have to kind of go, I feel like I'm kind of going back up the temple steps, being like, okay, is this the time that you're going to condemn me? And every single time. Yeah. It's no, you know, just please try to do better.
Who it is that Jesus is having the conversation with? Is it Peter maybe, that says, how many times am I to forgive this person? 7 times? And Jesus says, not 7 times, 77 times. Mm-hmm. You don't stop forgiving them. You have to continue to do that. You have to continue to show grace.
It makes me think about, I was explaining baptism, because the girls are they loved watching Liv get baptized. And Addie keeps telling me now she wants to be rebaptized because she just thought it was so cool. But they wanted, to understand what was the meaning behind it. And so I was just trying to explain, it's like, it's forgiveness for your sins, that Jesus died for you. But so whatever you did before, it's okay. But it doesn't mean that, like, now you're baptized, you can go and do whatever you want. It means, like, you're on this path now, and you're going to try to do your very best to be Christ-like.
Yeah, being a Christian isn't a free pass to just...
Right.
Which I wish more people would realize.
Right.
That, like, you can't say these horrendous, judgmental things and say, but I'm a Christian, and, like, it makes it okay.
Well, you can't weaponize God.
Yeah.
Like, that's the craziest thing to me. Don't tell me this is about God. This is about you. Mm-hmm. We can all see your judgment showing.
Well, I read something... So I had such an aha moment the other day. It came up on my Facebook feed. I think it was a video, and it was talking about how the commandment of do not take the Lord's name in vain is not saying, like, oh God, or oh Jesus. And I'm like, because when I was growing up, that's what I thought it meant. Like, if you said God or Jesus in, like, especially in a swearing way, then like that was taking God's name in vain. But it's not that. It's doing something in God's name that God would not condone.
I'm so glad that that's the meaning.
Right? Makes me feel so much better about myself. So it's like these atrocities that have been done throughout history since Jesus died, in his name and in God's name, I can't imagine what they're feeling like up there, just face palming every single time their name is being used to do something that they would never condone. And it's like, do you not see the red? They put them in red in the Bible for you. They've made it like a contrasting color. Like, how are you not?
That's hard.
How are you not understanding? Love one another.
No, so
do not judge.
What is
Love
it
one
red?
another.
Like,
do
what
not
red?
judge.
Like a red button, like
Yes.
emergency, like flashing lights.
Warning, warning. You are not me. Stop. Stop saying I would condone this, or Jesus thinks this, or God thinks this. No, I don't. No, I don't.
I was gonna say about like the giving people forgiveness, and it's so difficult too. Something that I really had to keep telling myself is that when people were coming at me and just really trying to break me down, and for me not to try to fight back. And I tell my girls this all the time: if you don't fight fire with fire, and that like I don't want to be that type of person. So if I fought in the same sort of way, then I'm becoming that sort of person, and I want to be a nicer person. So like even if it means that like I don't feel, like I don't know what the word is.
You don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to. You don't have to
Right.
show up to every fight that you're
Right.
invited to. So when people are coming at you, it's exactly what bullies want. They want a reaction from you. So when they don't get the reaction that they want, they don't know what to do with themselves.
It takes the air out of the issue.
Yeah, takes the air out of the fight. So it's one of these things where you, as a teacher, we're constantly having to tell kids, and as parents, we're having to constantly tell our kids, like, hey, you need to stop reacting this way. The only thing you're able to control is your reaction to this situation.
100%.
And
I
this
had a
person,
talk with Addie this past week about this.
Yeah.
Because reactive abuse is a thing too, and that people would do like poke and poke and poke. And I just told her, I was like, as her siblings
And then
get
gaslight.
older, yeah, and even with some adults in her life that like just in general adults in her life, like they can poke and poke and poke. And so you have to figure out how to not react, how to respond and not react, because it's just gonna make you miserable.
I have a maybe not very successful constant conversation about this with my daughter. She wants to fight everyone's battle.
Oh, right.
Yeah. You see it, Kate.
I do see it.
Right.
She's in my Sunday school class.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And I do have to constantly tell her, we don't have to show up for every fight.
Yeah. With the 4 siblings, I feel like it's almost like a competition between them. Like, who can be the most annoying
Oh,
to each
for
other?
sure.
Oh, yeah.
And you know who's gonna win? The boy. Every single time. Every single time. He's got 3 sisters.
Right.
He's gonna win every single time. But when he's older, he's gonna be such an amazing partner. And like, if that's the direction he just chooses to go, oh my gosh! If that's the sexuality choice that he chooses to go, any girl is gonna be.
And then if he has boys, he'll be like, what do I do?
I know, Mom, help, help.
Oh man.
So curious, other than God, other than your parents, maybe because you both talked about your parents showing you a lot of grace, who's shown you two a lot of grace?
My
That's a
kid.
good question.
I think my kid.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
I think it's something that, like, I mean, she's still young. Our kids are still young. So maybe that changes.
For now.
When they get older, maybe they won't show as much grace, but I think it is one of these, when they're little, they just love you so much and they just want you to love them back so much, so they just give it unconditionally. You say sorry and they're just like, okay, it's fine, and like move on. And I think as they get older, that probably, I'm sure we can talk to our friends that have teenage girls and
Well,
feel like maybe that's not so
maybe
much
it's
the
the
case.
dependence factor, right?
Yeah.
They're so dependent on us, but as they get older, they're less dependent and they get.
But I see it with them offer grace to each other too,
Oh,
though.
yeah.
Like kids are so forgiving and so quick to just forgive and forget and move on. Maybe not live, but
She's a Libra.
she may forgive, but
She has to balance the
she will
scales
never
for
forget. She won't forget for other people too. So I think it's as you get older, you know, that kind of more jaded part of you becomes a little bit more hesitant to offer the forgiveness, and you kind of hold on to it a little bit tighter. But yeah, I would definitely say my daughter.
I'm thinking my students and my bosses, like when I first started teaching, there's a lot of stumbling. There's a lot of like trial and error with teaching. Yeah. So I'm sure they gave me a lot of grace.
Yeah. I think my spouse, you know, for sure, Brad has shown me a ton of grace. He's seen me at my worst and at my best.
Yeah.
You know, I think when you love someone like that, they do, right? Anyone that you love that much, like your kid or your spouse, that passion comes out in the worst of ways sometimes, and then in the best of ways too. So do you think the worst things that have ever been done to you have been covered in grace by God?
Yeah. Although sometimes you kind of be like, God, I know you love everyone, but if you could just make this one exception. I know you offer grace to everyone, but I mean,
But surely you don't.
I'm just saying, this one person you could probably
You saw that, right?
like, you know, just ignore that prayer of forgiveness. Just, and God's like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Well, I think like God's grace coming through us too. Coming through us for not holding grudges and being kind when it's so difficult to do.
Yeah. It's profound. Life-changing.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, if you want to know more about Paul's story, you can find that in Acts 9, or the mission of the 12 is in Luke 9. And yeah, do we have anything else to add about grace?
Oh, I'm sure we could do like
We could.
12 episodes. Grace with our kids, grace with our parents, grace with our work friends, grace with our church, grace with our children. Yeah, grace while driving.
But please tell us, how have you found a pathway to give grace when it's felt really difficult? Would love to hear from you all too, the audience out there. Please tell us. And on that note, we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
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 Thank you for listening to this episode of Messy Christian Mamas. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, and Instagram. Until next time, embrace the mess, share the love, and shine your light bright, my friends.